head around.
Foreign costs rising faster than inflation, we have the most expensive daycare costs in the country at $1,675 per month. The report is by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. It found the most expensive childcare fees in the country are right here, sitting at 10 times higher than Montreal. Alicia Son takes us through the numbers.
How costly is Canadian childcare?
The word is scary.
Since 2017, childcare costs have risen faster than inflation in 61% of Canadian cities. Toronto is the most expensive.
We're really sticking out like a sore thumb.
Daycare in our city is nearly 10 times more expensive than in Montreal, where they've had a universal childcare program since 1997.
Let's compare. The median monthly fee for Quebec's largest city is $175. Here, it's $1,675.
More provinces are taking action on affordability. So it's not just Quebec anymore. There's 5 other provinces, Newfoundland, Manitoba, Prince Edward Island, Alberta, and BC are moving forward on capping childcare fees.
William, can you see up here?
The Ontario PCs campaigned on a childcare rebate.
This study actually shows that that's the wrong way to go because it doesn't do anything to control the fees. If you just give parents a check or give them a rebate, there's nothing to stop those fees just going up and more and more public money going to pay for that.
Because costs are up across the country, childcare advocates say the federal government needs to step in too.
We tend to treat this issue as a private problem. You know, it's you had the kids, you pay for them, you know, your problem. But if you really look at childcare, it's a hugely important program to our whole community, to our whole society, and to the economy.
Yeah.
I've heard lots here at the Coalition, parents calling, you know, they're taking out loans, you know, they're having to make decisions about whether or not they can afford to go back to work. And that's often the struggle that parents are going to have.
Really high numbers there for us. What else was in this study, Ali?
Well, it's a pretty big study. There's lots of information, lots of data, and lots of graphs. And one thing that was actually hidden was that the study showed that some daycares here in Toronto have been charging people to be on wait lists, even though Ontario banned childcare waitlist fees last year. Now, as for what the PC government is doing, they recently introduced a bill that would ease regulations on home daycares, allowing them to take on more children, but that move has been criticized as the old caps were brought in by the Liberals. Actually, they were thought of as, you know, being potentially dangerous.
After we had some tragic incidents, they brought those numbers in. Lots more to come on this. Thank you for this, Ali.
At no time did we direct the Attorney General, current or previous, to take any decision whatsoever in this matter.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau facing tough questions today after a bombshell report in the Globe and Mail. It says the Prime Minister's office pressed then Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould to intervene in the case against construction giant SNC-Lavalin. When she refused, she was shuffled out of the job.
The Prime Minister must immediately come clean to Canadians about what he knew about this case and when he knew it.
Universal access to a strong and robust health care.
A major shakeup for our Raptors today. They're reportedly sending Jonas Valanciunas, CJ Miles, DeLon Wright to Memphis, all for Grizzlies center Marc Gasol. Greg Ross is at Raptors practice facility for us tonight. And Greg, the trade deadline was hours ago. We were expecting to hear from the team with something official by now. What's going on down there?
That's an excellent question, Dwight. We were expecting to hear from Masai Ujiri, the Raptors president, at about 3 o'clock today. Somebody from the team came into the room here. This is the media room at the Raptors training facility. They came in and said it could be anywhere from an hour to 4 hours. Well, they came in again and said, look, we're going to order you guys dinner because it's going to be a while. So it won't be until at least 7 o'clock before we hear from Masai Ujiri. We're assuming that the reason for that is because the team is currently waiting for approval from the league on this big deal. But we did expect that the Raptors would be active at the trade line. They didn't disappoint. According to reports, they have landed that big veteran center, Marc Gasol, from the Memphis Grizzlies, a three-time All-Star who was averaging 15.7 points a game this season. Now, in order to get the 7'1" center, the Raps having to part ways with 3 players and a draft pick, including in that mix, Jonas Valanciunas, a fan favorite here in Toronto, had been with the team for now. This is his 6th season. Valanciunas was actually scheduled to return to the Raptors lineup tonight, believe it or not. He had missed 25 games with a dislocated thumb, but obviously he won't be making that return in Atlanta tonight, as he's now off to Memphis to play with the Grizzlies. They also give up CJ Miles, as you mentioned, and DeLon Wright, and that leaves a couple of empty spots on the Raptors roster right now. At this point, we're not sure how they're going to fill those spots on the roster. So that's something else we're waiting to hear from Masai Ujiri. Obviously, there's something else in the mix, and we're waiting to hear what that's going to be.
Like Gasol, but I was a Jonas fan too. Going to miss him on this team. How does this, Greg, then set us up for what we're hoping is a long run in this year's playoffs?
That's a great question, Dwight, because for the last 24, 48 hours, we've been sitting back and watching other teams in the Eastern Conference make moves around the Raptors and beefing up. And we're going to bring in NBA writer for The Athletic, Eric Koreen, to talk a little bit about that. And the Raptors obviously had to make this move because they're in some tough company in that Eastern Conference now.
Absolutely. After the Raptors beat Philadelphia on Tuesday night, the 76ers traded for Tobias Harris, who's a borderline all-star. Didn't make it this year, but very easily could have. And then they added some shooters today before the deadline. And the Boston Celtics didn't do much, but the Milwaukee Bucks added Nikola Mirotic from New Orleans, who really gives them another strong shooter and a very tough front court player to play against the player with the player who might be the MVP of the league, Giannis Antetokounmpo. So it was, if you're looking at the top 4 in the Eastern Conference, you're thinking maybe the Raptors are a player or 2 behind those groups. In Gasol, they get a very experienced player with superb passing, superb intelligence. They give up a very good player in Jonas Valanciunas, but it's not too much of their future. And given the situation with Kawhi Leonard going into free agency, Masai Ujiri clearly felt that he needed to make the most out of this roster.
It's interesting. I think at the beginning of this season, early on, when the Raptors were doing so well, a lot of people would have thought that the Raptors were the runaway favorite in the East. Not so much anymore. They've got some tough company in those playoffs, Dwight, so they definitely needed to make some sort of move here at the trade deadline.
I'm still believing the hype. Thank you, Greg.
Please stand clear of the doors.
Some more sports for you now, yes. You are looking at your Maple Leafs on the subway, not your usual morning commute. Blue and white riding the Red Rocket today on their way to this outdoor practice for the fans. We'll hit the ice with them a little later in the show. And not a bad day for a skate at Nathan Phillips Square, Nick.
No, it wasn't, Dwight, but better off riding the TTC than on the roads right now. A little bit in the way of icy conditions, and this is all with the system that we promised you yesterday. It is also going to bring with it some warm weather, but that'll come through tonight. There is a whole lot to talk about, and this is what it is. It's a fairly large system that's sweeping across, but rain showers down to southwestern Ontario. We have had recent freezing rain, though, in the city of Toronto as we're just on the edge of this warm front. You can see that in pink as it slid across. Now, as a result of that, Environment Canada issued freezing rain warnings in the area. Our temperatures sitting just below the 0 mark for the most part around the Golden Horseshoe. Now, temperatures are going to come up, but in the meanwhile, we've got freezing rain warnings in the areas in pink, including the GTA, and wind warnings as well, because this system is going to bring with it wind gusts up to about 80 kilometers per hour, and in some areas like Niagara and shorelines of Lake Huron and Georgian Bay, up to 100 kilometers per hour. So special weather statements also in effect across the region for winds tonight. Forecast-wise, temperatures going up to 9 degrees, which might break a record just after the midnight hour, but they will quickly fall. By tomorrow morning, look for a temperature of -1, falling to -5 by the afternoon, feeling like -13 as an average, and it gets even colder toward the evening. We've got a cold weekend in the forecast. Full details coming up in just a bit.
Thank you, Nick.
You bet.
It's a bombshell allegation leveled against the highest office in the land, and Conservatives in Ottawa say it signals the possibility of attempted interference in a corruption trial by the Prime Minister's office. Julie Van Duzen is following it all from our parliamentary bureau in Ottawa. So, Julie, lay out the basis of these allegations.
Well, I mean, it certainly has Parliament Hill buzzing, and it had Andrew Scheer coming out well before a question period to make some comments, so he must think he's on to something. And the story is all outlined in the Globe and Mail, a story about political interference, and it relates to Jody Wilson-Raybould when she was Justice Minister. And the story says that she was pressured to interfere in the prosecution case against SNC-Lavalin, the engineering giant from Quebec, but that she refused to interfere. The idea was that they could avoid prosecution and take a softer route, but that she refused to interfere. Now, since the charges against Lavalin, it's been trying to get what's called a deferred prosecution agreement, which would basically allow it to pay a fine instead of facing prosecution. Now, the interesting part about Jody Wilson-Raybould is you have to consider that she was just shuffled from the Justice portfolio to Veterans Affairs. It was seen as a demotion. So there's a lot of twists and turns here, and people are asking a lot of questions, including to the Prime Minister. So take a listen to him, followed by reaction.
At no time did we direct the Attorney General, current or previous, to take any decision whatsoever in this matter.
Very serious allegations have been raised, and the Prime Minister has been completely unable to respond to them. He has stayed very carefully close to a very carefully crafted legalistic answer.
Do you see what they're doing? A carefully crafted denial that isn't a denial at all.
Deeply shocking and completely inappropriate. And Jody Wilson-Raybould was, if that story is correct, she deserves a medal.
So what's SNC-Lavalin's argument then in favor of a deferred prosecution here, Julie?
Well, it's been arguing that there were some bad apples involved with the company when it had these contracts in Libya. They're no longer there. Meanwhile, the company has suffered a severe blow to its reputation, harder to get contracts, jobs are affected. So this is the argument it's trying to make. And if they were convicted of fraud or corruption, they wouldn't be able to compete for government contracts for a decade. So that is their big deal argument. Don't forget, they're a big firm in Quebec. They make big political contributions. So back to Jody Wilson-Raybould to wrap up. You know, don't forget, when she was moved over to Veterans Portfolio, she wrote a big, long letter that day talking about her accomplishments in justice and the importance of having a justice ministry free from political interference. Quite telling now. She was peppered with questions in question period today, and she didn't utter a peep.
Interesting. Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
There was tension today at Metrolink's public meeting over two controversial subway projects. The Yonge North Line extending up from Finch to Highway 7 and the Downtown Relief Line. Now, the mayor of Markham says Metrolinx is now giving mixed signals over which project takes priority. Farah Morelli joins us live now from Union Station. And Farah, this all stems from a report that came out last week.
That's right, Dwight. So last week we heard from Metrolinx that the Downtown Relief subway line should be opened before the Yonge North subway line, and that's because of capacity issues. And that was a departure from what we'd heard before, which was that these two projects should proceed together. That report has now sparked outcry among some mayors in the York region, including the mayor of Markham, who came to today's Metrolinx meeting to voice his concerns. Outside the Metrolinx board meeting, CEO Phil Verster and Markham Mayor Frank Scarpitti exchanged close words after a tense morning.
So it's really to update you on the three streams of work that
Moments earlier, Scarpitti and David Barrow, mayor of Richmond Hill, listened intently from the front row as Metrolinx staff explained why the Downtown Relief Line should be opened before the Yonge North Line.
I'm giving you a very brief information on Relief Line North.
Throughout the presentation, Verster interrupted, saying no subway project should take priority over another.
I think we are hearing mixed messages.
Scarpitti says he heard two different things at the meeting and called the Metrolinx research flawed.
But when anyone or any evidence is shown that that line has to be operational before we extend the Yonge subway an inch is wrong. And we've got the evidence to show it. And the Yonge subway extension is not going to take a backseat to any other project in the GTA.
The Yonge North Line would run 7.4 kilometers starting from Finch Station and would extend all the way to Highway 7 in Richmond Hill. The downtown relief line would start on Line 1 at Osgood Station and run east, then north up to Pape, with 8 stations along the way. In its report, Metrolinx says the downtown relief line needs to take priority because Line 1 is already at capacity, and adding more to that would make it worse.
That's the real discussion, is how do we build subways quicker? We shouldn't say one scheme is more important than another scheme.
CEO Phil Verster stood by his stance in the meeting today, but then conceded the downtown relief line must be built first.
Every bit of data we've got suggests the relief line south must be open first, yes. And there's a very simple reason for that. The relief line south will divert passengers from the existing really busy Line 1. And it's crucial that that happens.
The jockeying between politicians and Metrolinx is to be expected, says this transportation expert, because of money and the looming upload of subways to the province.
And we know that transit projects take a long time in this region and are unpredictable and can be canceled. And so what you're seeing is that the different politicians and the different stakeholders are now making the strongest case for their projects, recognizing that if someone else goes first and then the taps get turned off on money, then their project might be delayed or even canceled altogether.
Now, Dwight, we don't yet know what this legislation to upload the subways is going to look like or how cities like Toronto or Markham will be involved. But one thing that the mayor of Markham told me today was that he's actually looking forward to that. He seems to think that the province will be supportive of the Yonge North subway line proceeding. But of course, the province has said both of these projects are a priority.
Thank you, Farah. New revelations today about serial killer nurse Elizabeth Wetlaufer. CBC News has learned provincial prosecutors withheld knowledge that the former nurse had committed more crimes than she was charged with. John Lancaster is here with more details on this. And John, you learned of another incident in addition to the one you reported on last week?
Yeah, it appears, Dwight, that the list of victims is growing. We now know there was a second unreported attack. This one involved a patient at the Crescent Care home in Woodstock, Ontario. We're told that Wetlaufer placed a pillow over this person's face and attempted to smother them. The attack was interrupted. Now, none of this information, Dwight, was revealed to the public. Wetlaufer was never charged with this second additional crime, nor was the public inquiry that was supposed to be getting to the bottom of the extent of these crimes ever advised about these 2 extra crimes. The inquiry says until it was too late and the inquiry was over. I spoke to Daniel Silcox today. His father was killed by Wetlaufer at this care home where this smothering is now being reported. Here's what he told me today about the supposed secrecy going on here.
It's absolutely disgraceful. I mean, I don't understand what's to be gained by not allowing the public to know about this. In order for the commission to achieve what they want to achieve, they have to understand and acknowledge and publish the scope of the crimes.
So, John, what is the Ministry of the Attorney General now saying about all of this?
Well, not much. These were their prosecutors that didn't pass on this information. We have a lot of questions for the Ministry of Attorney General. Specifically, is this going to affect this public inquiry? Why didn't they tell us about this? Why was it kept secret? But so far, they aren't responding to our inquiries, multiple inquiries. And this is important, Dwight, because we've always been led to believe that she injected her victims. That was the only MO we've ever heard about. That's the only MO the inquiry ever talked about. But we're now learning there's potential second MO here with this smothering.
Yeah, and it needs to be looked into. Thank you for this, John.
Okay.
To me, it was an obvious decision. And when you make a decision that you think is just obvious, you don't worry too much about the criticism.
He helped bring in same-sex marriage and also took on violence in hockey. After the break, the conclusion of my talk with former Ontario Chief Justice Roy McMurtry. What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I just like them to think that, that I cared.
The weather update is brought to you by Train Extreme Conditions Testing. It's hard to stop a train, really hard. Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
Roy McMurtry's storied career spans more than 60 years. He's a former Attorney General and Chief Justice and a champion of human rights. We met with him to talk about his legacy and how he tried bringing the criminal code to hockey rinks.
We'd like to see that the people who are responsible for professional hockey clean up their own act.
Nobody ever has gotten hurt with a punch in the nose, and I don't believe anybody ever will.
I want to talk about hockey.
Yes.
Do you remember the hockey controversy?
Oh, very well.
What prompted you to speak about, Canada's favorite game?
Well, actually, it was my late brother, Bill. I don't know if you ever knew Bill, but he was asked by the Ontario government a year before I became Attorney General to do a report on excessive violence in really amateur hockey. And I just happened to inherit my brother's report. And it says any clear infractions, criminal infractions, breaches the criminal code, like a criminal assault, could be prosecuted. And
on the ice, if they were fighting.
On the ice. I had police officers going to the games just to watch the games, not for crowd control. And they phoned me up and said they were going to charge for the Philadelphia players with criminal assaults. And I said, well, that's your decision, but if you've made that decision, you might help support the cause by arresting them before they get out of Toronto. So they were all four of them were arrested and mugshot. Wow. and it really created quite a stir. But it sent an important message. And the game, the game changed dramatically over the years.
As a judge, you made same-sex marriage legal.
Yes.
A decision that took effect immediately. And at the time, you must have received backlash from the religious community, from other communities.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it was a brave, now we think about it as it's not a big deal.
I got a lot of nasty letters.
Talk about that, the courage behind some of those decisions.
Well, to me, it was an obvious decision.
Even back then? Even though society, it seems like you're making these rulings and society's catching up to them.
And this is back in 2003, so it does go back more than 15 years. And to me, it was an obvious decision. And when you make a decision that you think is just obvious, you don't worry too much about the criticism you receive. And, and occasionally, the young same-sex couples stopped me in the street. And she said, we're not going to ever get married, but the fact that we can is what makes a difference for us.
What do you want your legacy to be? When people think about Roy McMurtry's contributions, and we know we have your name on all kind of buildings, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I just like them to think that I cared. And it's as simple as that. As simple as love thy neighbor as thyself, or that I just cared about making life a little better for people. And that's all I could do.
I think caring and compassion has been a wonderful part of your legacy. I've gotten the chance to work with you on community events with Second Chance Scholarship, trying to give young people a chance to stay out of prison and get their lives on the right track. So that has been a real pleasure for me.
Well, you've been a great supporter of Second Chance Scholarship.
Well, that's part of the legacy
I hear,
too. It is that legacy
it's part
of
of your legacy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dwight.
The application is in and work is underway for Brampton's first legal cannabis store. I'm Lorenda Redekop. I'll tell you how the neighbors and politicians are feeling. That's coming up.
When it comes to pot shops, Brampton is a divided city. As the first store moves in, residents have 2 weeks to speak out. There are 2 here in Toronto, 1 in St. Catharines, and the 4th proposed location for an Ontario pot shop is in Brampton. The path to allow the brick and mortar shops in that city has not been smooth, with one council launching a petition and a website to stop them from moving in. Lorenda Redekop went to visit the proposed site and spoke to people on both sides of the debate.
The transformation is on to turn this former medical clinic into a cannabis store. In the place of that sign, imagine the name Ganjika House. The owner has the official posting up on the door.
It's doctors' offices was essentially what the inside is, and we just have to move around a couple of things so we have a retail store sort of layout instead of a clinic layout.
Just across the parking lot, the closest neighbor is an Indian restaurant.
Because of the outside is sometimes the people they smoke and throw it is coming for the smell for the inside.
This is the closest school to the site. It's about 800 meters away. That's well over the minimum distance that the government has set of 150 meters between schools and cannabis shops. The surrounding area also includes many other schools, though all of them are at least a kilometer from the proposed site.
The parents are concerned that they walk this area on Main Street, they bring their kids to the local Dollarama, the Shoppers Drug Mart, and they're just concerned that it's too close in their community.
It seems by all first glances to be very far away from many of the local schools in the area, and so it looks like in this situation the retailer, the applicant, has considered the neighborhood.
People have 2 weeks to go online to comment on any of the proposed sites, but they have to be local residents and can only raise concerns about specific issues.
Public health and safety, youth, and illicit activities. Those are the submissions that the registrar would consider from the public, the residents of that community.
If the site is overruled, the owner could find another shop. But Clint Sukaran is already thinking of the future here at this location. Years ago, it was a Burger King.
There's a drive-through. However, we're not going to use it as yet until the regulations permit. I would love to incorporate it into the store structure at some point, yes.
Lorenda Redekop, CBC News, Brampton.
New numbers from Stats Canada shows legalized weed isn't having as big as an effect on the black market as the federal government would hope. The figures show about 4.6 million people use cannabis in the last 3 months. That's about 15% of Canadians over 15 years old. Now, nearly half of those who said they use cannabis said they did so for non-medicinal reasons. And of those non-medical users, 42% say they got their weed illegally. That means through unlicensed websites, illegal dispensaries, or through street dealers. If you work in an office or have children, you don't need me to tell you it's been a really bad flu season. The good news, this year's immunization shot is pretty successful. The bad news, it's now hard to find. Coming up, we explain why.
People are getting the vaccine. Unfortunately, we ran out.
To not be able to give a baby at 6 months old, the highest risk group, just seems absurd.
Fire forced residents of a Brampton high-rise out into the cold early this morning.
The firemen came and they told us to get out of the building. The fire had started.
It's insane, you know, it's unreal because how the weather is, you know, it's snowing, it's about 6 a.m. now. No one's been in their properties for about 2 to 3 hours now. We're waiting on what's going on. And, you know.
It happened around 3 a.m. near Kennedy and Queen Streets. Fire crews got a call about sparks coming from an electrical panel on the 11th floor. A pipe had cracked, sending water into the elevator shafts. Now, Brampton Fire says some of that water may have leaked into an electrical panel, causing the fire. The entire building was evacuated. Then all of the residents, except for those on the top 3 floors, were allowed to return to their units. TTC shelter buses were eventually brought in, but those left out in the cold, they were eventually taken to nearby Century Garden Recreation Center.
So that's what happens when we get these, deep freezes and then the thaws. If there was a small leak, maybe that was undetected in a system that was in the elevator shaft, it wouldn't be detected until the thaw happens, and then now pipes expand and the leaks will start.
Fire officials say it could take a while before displaced residents are allowed to return to their units. And it's a chilly countdown for residents at a St. James Town high-rise. They are waiting for their heat to be turned back on. We told you about 280 Wellesley yesterday. Heat and water were cut off for the first 15 floors while the city tries to find a fault in an electrical panel. Two of the other buildings managed by the same company in the area had a fire and a burst pipe that forced people out of their homes. Businesses on Scarborough's Golden Mile are concerned about big equipment blocking customers. The area along Eglinton is east of the DVP, and that's where the Eglinton Crosstown's next phase of construction will be. The opening of the new LRT line is still at least 2 years away, but businesses say they're shocked by how much disruption the work is already causing. Nellie Danowski speaks with some of them.
They could be closing off this part. They could be blocking the other entrance. They could be bringing in equipment or not.
This Ford dealership has been in Paul Leonard's family for decades. He knew construction of the Eglinton Crosstown was going to shake things up along the Golden Mile, but this...
Well, it has not made business better. It's just there's less people on the street, less people driving in.
Metrolink says it's trying to minimize the negative effects, putting up signs letting customers know stores are open for business. The city is also working with shop owners between Victoria Park and Kennedy.
We do actually have in this year's budget $1 million of marketing and digital programming, internet programming to assist the businesses to really get the public to know that they're actually open.
Meanwhile, the other side of Eglinton knows all about crosstown growing pains. This part of Eglinton West has been in the midst of construction for years. Metrolink stepped in alongside the local BIA to create Experience Eglinton, a campaign to help bring foot traffic and shoppers back to the area. But shop owners here will tell you it didn't work. How many people did you have come in today?
I haven't had nobody in today.
No one?
No one.
Jason McDonald owns Casual Hair Salon on Eglinton and Oakwood. This was construction outside of his shop in 2017. Here's the storefront from last summer. And this is what it looks like now.
We don't get no walk-ins, none.
And you used to get walk-ins before?
Oh, the area was much more walk-in friendly.
After more than 3 years of this, Jason McDonald has some advice for his friends in the East End.
If they could relocate, maybe that might be better.
The city admits there's been some bumps in the road, and it does have some new suggestions for the east side of Eglinton. Leonard knows the crosstown will eventually bring new business to this area. He just hopes that his dealership can ride it out until then. Natalie Nanowski, CBC News, Toronto.
Students skipping school, maybe some parents skipping work, all to see the Toronto Maple Leafs hit the ice at Nathan Phillips Square today. The team puts on a show during an outdoor practice every year, and Greg Ross caught up with some really excited fans.
Please stand clear of the doors.
It's definitely not something you see every day.
Yeah, no, they were pretty shocked.
The Leafs players on the subway in full gear on their way to an outdoor practice at Nathan Phillips Square.
We surprised some people. A couple people hopping on the subway with their head down, pick their head up.
My wife takes it all the time. I've brought it the odd time. Sometimes it can be a full mugging, so you got to be careful, but today was great.
It was standing room only at City Hall, where thousands gathered.
What's it like to see these guys up close and in person like this, outside at a weird place like this?
Great.
Why?
Because I like hockey.
It gives me an excuse to tell the wife, oh, she wants to go, so...
It's really Dad that wants to go.
Yeah, that's it.
Some were even lucky enough to snag an autograph.
You got Zach Hyman on your Matthews jersey.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy.
I pulled him out of school in order to do this.
But it wasn't just the fans soaking in the excitement.
Just to be outside, change the atmosphere, make you feel like a kid.
You know, I think this is hockey at its roots. This is the favorite type of hockey I like to play.
Down to 20 seconds of a scoreless game.
The Leafs entertained fans with a 3-on-3 tournament, which Austin Matthews, Jake Muzzin, and Connor Brown won, earning a coveted prize.
Free pass for morning skate, so me and Muzz and Matt's got to figure when to cash that in.
Coach Mike Babcock called it a great break from the regular routine, and he hopes it energizes his team as they head into the stretch drive of the regular season. Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
When the people come here, I want them to remember how to eat the fish and fall in love with it.
After the break, where in Toronto you can find this grill house that's serving up authentic Mediterranean seafood. Stay with us. We're back in just a few minutes.
It's all about seafoods imported from Egypt. My name is Hisham Abderrahim. I'm the owner of Mermaid Fish and Grill House, located at Yonge and St. Clair. When the people come here, I want them to remember how to eat the fish and fall in love with it. When it comes to farros, it's from the farro how they eat it. So we coat it with wheat bran. That's after we clean the fish. Then we barbecue it. Then we marinate it in lemon and garlic, cumin, salt, pepper, vinegar, and it come out so tasty because you have the crunchy from the outside, the very tender from the inside. Singari is a fish where we can butterfly it, barbecue it with some beautiful herbs, lemon, garlic, cumin, coriander, and topped with onion, tomato, and sweet pepper. And it's flamed, very flaky, and so tasty.
And it sounds like we may be able to hit the barbecue on the deck tonight, Nick, with these temperatures.
Yeah, now I got some good news and some bad news for you, Dwight. Okay. Which one do you want first?
Good, please.
Okay, the good news is we might actually break a temperature record tonight.
Oh.
The bad news is you'll probably be sleeping when it happens. What can I do? I can't control the timing of this stuff, guys. What we're looking at is a system that's moving through. I'm going to get to the temperatures here in a second because, again, potentially record-breaking temperatures tonight, but it's all coming after some freezing rain in the area. So we had some some freezing rain over the last couple of hours across the GTA. That is pretty much swept off right now. We'll get through the watches and warnings first here. Freezing rain warnings in effect from about the Hamilton area southwestward, and then also wind warnings too. And this all ties into our system here. Those winds are going to bring some warm temperatures before they usher in some very cold temperatures over the next 24-hour. Wind warnings as well up around Lake Huron and Georgian Bay with wind gusts up to about 100 kilometers per hour. For the GTA, we're not under a wind warning, but we are under a special weather statement right now. That goes all the way down in southwestern Ontario as winds gust about 50 to 80 kilometers per hour tonight. And these winds first out of the south, and that's going to pump in some warmer air. And then By the time we hit tomorrow morning, they shift more to the west, and that westerly wind is going to be behind a cold front. It's going to drag in some colder temperatures. Those winds continue all the way through until Saturday. So it's not just the temperatures that are going to be cold, but it'll be the wind chills as well. So let's talk about the precipitation, and then we'll get into the temperatures. Rain showers tonight, switching over through the overnight period to some snow flurries. Areas north of the GTA could see about 2, 3, 4 centimeters, and blowing snow as well if you're commuting in from the north. That with lake effect snow off of Lake Huron and Georgian Bay. The temperatures are going to rise and then fall down in the Windsor area, already at 9 degrees right now, 2 in London, still sitting at -1 in the city of Toronto, but those are going to climb through tonight. In fact, we're forecasting a high tonight of about 9 degrees in the city of Toronto, 11 down in Hamilton. Some pretty gusty winds, but they're going to fall. In fact, by tomorrow morning, temperatures sitting around -1, -2 degrees. By the afternoon, -5. So this is a very short-lived warm-up. Forecast through the long range, -1 in the morning, average wind chill of -13, but by the afternoon it'll be closer to -20. Cold overnight lows, -5 on Saturday, -5 on Sunday. Potentially a mixed bag for next Tuesday. We'll watch that as we get a bit closer.
Thanks, Nick.
You bet.
It's been a bad flu season, especially for children. So far across the country, 10 have died and at least 126 have been treated in intensive care. That has parents rushing to get their kids protected. As Christine Burak tells us, that's now causing a shortage.
So this is the shelf that we have available for flu vaccine, and as you can see, we don't have any.
It's not an easy conversation to have with parents, but
I unfortunately wasn't able to give you the flu vaccine.
Pediatrician Jacob Rosenberg is having it.
People are getting the vaccine. Unfortunately, we ran out.
Leaving 6-month-old Jessica here and other kids across Ontario vulnerable.
To not be able to give a baby at 6 months old, the highest risk group, just seems absurd.
While you may be thinking it's too late for Jessica to get the shot, flu season happens in waves and goes until April. As the first strain begins to wind down, Dr. Rosenberg says another is coming.
Now, influenza B can be particularly dangerous for children, and to not have an opportunity to be covered against it is a shame.
Ontario's health ministry says there is flu vaccine in the system. Problem is, it's largely in pharmacies, which aren't authorized to vaccinate children under 5. While other provinces are starting to run low, Nova Scotia is actually rationing flu shots.
I was surprised because we never thought that we will run out.
The province's chief medical officer of health is asking that pharmacists collaborate with local physicians to ensure children have access to vaccine. But moving flu vaccine around is harder than you might think. This infectious disease specialist says vaccine must be kept cold but never frozen. Having it change hands can threaten quality assurance.
It looks obvious that rules should be broken, but those rules are actually there for very good reason to protect the safety of our vaccine supply.
After being turned away by walk-in clinics, Danielle Plack says a family doctor finally gave Jessica a dose of flu vaccine. But young children need 2.
It is frustrating.
There's no guarantee she'll get the second dose for protection. Christine Burak, CBC News, Woodbridge, Ontario.
Okay, here's your trivia for the next commercial break. What's the name of the newest Mars rover? Here's a hint. It's named in honor of a prominent British scientist who helped expand our understanding of the structure of DNA. Bonus marks if you can guess which part of the rover was made right here in Canada. The answers after the break. A Mars rover built in Britain with some Canadian parts now has an official name. The European Space Agency will send the rover to the Red Planet next year to search for the building blocks of life. Kayla Hounsel has more about the rover and its mission.
This is the Mars yard at the UK Space Agency. There's sand and rock all over the place because the Space Agency is trying to simulate the conditions on Mars. This is where they're testing the rover prototype that they will send to Mars in 2020. Today it was named the Rosalind Franklin rover after a British chemist. So let's talk about how it works. When it gets on Mars, a drill will come down from here and collect samples of soil from the planet that will then be analyzed in the body of the rover itself. Meanwhile, satellites, which are already in orbit, will be moving around the rover and they will send that data back to scientists on Earth. I want to show you the wheels. These wheels were actually designed and manufactured in Canada by a company called MDA. They have offices at various locations across the country. This is a very exciting day for everyone here at the UK Space Agency. We had a chance to speak with British astronaut Tim Peake, who believes there is life on Mars, but says it's important to find out for sure.
I think it's hugely important. It's a fundamental question that we all ask ourselves: are we alone in the universe? If we find out that actually biogenesis occurred on Mars, two planets in one solar system next to each other, then the implications for the life elsewhere in the universe is huge.
And there's another Canadian connection to the Mars rover as well. The name Rosalind Franklin was chosen from a naming contest. Nearly 36,000 people suggested ideas, and we know that a Canadian was one of 21 people who submitted the winning name. The Rosalind Franklin rover will launch in 2020, and it will take up to 9 months to reach Mars. Kayla Hounsel, CBC News, Stevenage, England.
The nominations are out, and 2 CBC productions, and with an E and Schitt's Creek, lead the way. How the Canadian Screen Awards show the shift in film and television, coming up next. Congratulations to Anne with an E and Schitt's Creek, tied with 15 nominations each. As the Canadian Screen Awards nominees were announced today, and as we hear from Eli Glasner, the nods tell the tale of an increasing gulf between film and television.
In the Canadian TV and film industry, the nominations were a tale of two solitudes. On the small screen, shows are succeeding. The kind comedy of Schitt's Creek is making headlines around the world. This morning, it tied with Anne with an E for 15 nominations. Whether it's Letterkenny, Cardinal, or Kim's Convenience, the audience for Canadian shows is going global. Narrow the focus to film, and the picture changes. This year, both the original screenplay and Best Motion Picture categories were exclusively French language nominees. Canadian Academy CEO Beth Jansen says the industry is in a time of transition.
The film industry globally is struggling right now, the answer is not just to make everything episodic. I do think there are lessons to be learned. I think that it's a very important form of storytelling, the long-form film. I don't think it's going away.
I don't even know how I'm going to tell Brody and Denise.
Kim's Convenience star Andrew Fung says the nominations are a testament to the strength of the Francophone community.
They have like a full star system. They're telling stories. They're really putting support into their filmmakers, but also their young filmmakers look up and they see all these established filmmakers, and there's a whole system there.
Take a look at the box office numbers and you can see what filmmakers are fighting. In 2016, French language films made up 8.7% of the audience. English language was even less at 0.9%. French or English, it's difficult to compete with Hollywood's marketing muscle. Director Matt Johnson says the conditions that come with telefilm funding are part of the problem.
That require you to work with American mega movie stars, that require you to make your films a certain way, and what that winds up doing is creating an anti-Canadian star system.
To combat that, Telefilm has launched programs to support new voices. The director of The Grizzlies points to her CSA-nominated stars as a positive sign.
They're both Indigenous, they're both from Nunavut, they're both Inuit, and that's a first, and I'm so excited and proud of them. So I think there's a lot of different things happening in English Canadian cinema.
Celebrating the best of Canadian film and television.
And in a reflection of the changing landscape, this year's televised Screen Awards will be hostless in order to put comedy ensembles in the spotlight. Eli Glasser, CBC News, Toronto.
And congrats to Eli, who also received a nomination today. So did our newsroom. We got 4, including Best Local Newscast. I got Best Local Anchor nominations. Mike Crawley nominated for Best Local Reporter, and our Ontario Election Special was nominated for Best Live News. So congrats to the team, everybody.
Right on.
Let's talk about this great weather we're having overnight. I mean, the Leafs would have been skating on a pond today if it was 9 or 10 degrees out there.
Exactly, I know. So, I mean, we've delayed it till the nighttime. Unfortunately, like I said, the barbecue's going to have to wait till about midnight or so. But anyway, we are potentially breaking a record tonight. The record for today was about 7.8 degrees. So if we hit 9 before midnight, we'll break that record. If not, the record for tomorrow is 9 degrees as well, and that might happen about 1 a.m. or so. So anyway, 9 degrees is our high tonight. Winds pretty gusty there, 50 to 80 kilometers per hour. And then we're also looking at temperatures falling pretty quickly. By the morning commute, look for a temperature of -1, wind chill of -10, winds gusting to about 80 kilometers per hour. Tomorrow afternoon, -5, wind chills around -13, -14, and it keeps dropping after that. So, yeah, I wish I could time this a little better for you, but
it's the wild swings that are hard to understand. How do we go from 9 in the night to maybe -13 with a wind chill less than 24 hours away?
And you know what? I didn't even mention the risk of a thunderstorm tonight too. So I mean, this will be short-lived and brief, but if you hear it, you know.
Keeps guys like you busy though.
We're throwing everything in there for you. Maybe some snow flurries for tomorrow too, as I said.
That's it for us tonight. Thank you for watching. Mike Wise will have your next local newscast at 11 tonight. Nick will figure out these wild swings in the forecast for us. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 6. Have a great night, everybody.